The DNA never matched him. They convicted him anyway. Christopher Tapp was sentenced in 1998 for the rape and murder of 18-year-old Angie Dodge in Idaho Falls. The biological material collected from her apartment, the evidence that should have identified the attacker, did not match Tapp. Prosecutors disclosed the mismatch at trial, framed it as an unknown contributor, and asked the jury to accept a confession as dispositive. The confession, obtained after interrogators threatened Tapp with the death penalty and repeatedly supplied him with crime details, became the centerpiece of a case that ignored its own science. In 2019, investigative genetic genealogy linked the crime scene DNA to Brian Dripps, Angie's neighbor. Dripps confessed. Tapp had lost more than 20 years to a conviction the biology contradicted. Angie Dodge was 18 on June 13, 1996. She lived alone in an Idaho Falls apartment and did not appear for work that morning. When acquaintances checked on her, they found she had been sexually assaulted and fatally stabbed. Investigators collected evidence from the scene, including biological material that belonged to the person who attacked her. That DNA profile was the most direct link to the perpetrator. When detectives later focused on Christopher Tapp, who knew another person tangentially connected to the inquiry, they compared his DNA to the crime sample. It did not match. The physical evidence pointed away from him. The investigation moved toward him regardless. Tapp was young, socially and intellectually vulnerable, and without a history of violent crime. He was subjected to repeated interrogation sessions that independent reviewers later described as coercive. Officers warned him he faced the death penalty and offered implied protection in exchange for cooperation. They provided him with specific details of the assault and asked him to confirm them. His initial statements were inconsistent. Under the pressure of threats and leading prompts, his accounts hardened into a confession that mirrored information investigators had fed him. What emerged was not a spontaneous admission born of memory, but a constructed statement produced by techniques known to elicit false confessions. At trial, prosecutors conceded the DNA mismatch, but argued it was an unexplained third-party contribution, and that Tapp's confession established guilt. The jury was asked to set aside the forensic exclusion and rely on the inculpatory statement. They convicted. Tapp received life imprisonment with substantial parole ineligibility, plus additional time for rape. The documented DNA that did not match him remained in the file, a scientific fact sidelined by prosecutorial narrative. The man whose biological material was at the scene remained free, uncharged, and nearby. Carol Dodge, Angie's mother, confronted an impossible truth. Her daughter had been murdered, and the man convicted for that murder might be innocent. Rather than accept the settlement of a conviction as closure, she examined the evidence, questioned the confession, and became a persistent advocate for re-examination. Carol worked with attorneys, investigators, and advocacy organizations, insisting that the documented DNA discrepancy and the circumstances of Tapp's interrogation warranted renewed scrutiny. The victim's mother pressed the system to treat science as proof rather than inconvenience. Investigative genetic genealogy changed everything. Law enforcement submitted the crime scene profile to genealogical databases and constructed family trees from distant matches, an approach that solved the Golden State Killer case years earlier. That process led to Brian Dripps, who had lived across the street from Angie in 1996. Investigators obtained a discarded cigarette butt from his vehicle and tested it against the crime profile. The match was complete. Confronted with that evidence in May 2019, Dripps confessed, admitting he had acted alone and that Christopher Tapp was not involved. In 2021, Dripps pleaded guilty to rape and murder and received a life sentence with parole eligibility after 20 years. On July 17, 2019, a judge vacated Tapp's murder conviction. The court acknowledged the new evidence and the confession by the true perpetrator, declaring that Tapp was cleared of the charges he had carried for more than 2 decades. He walked out of prison after serving the term for a crime the science had excluded in 1996. He later filed civil claims. Idaho Falls settled for $11,700,000. The financial award could not restore the lost years, nor erase the psychological and social harms inflicted by incarceration and public condemnation. The case reveals multiple systemic failures: interrogation methods that manufacture false confessions, prosecutorial willingness to subordinate scientific exclusion to narrative, and institutional resistance to revisiting verdicts, even when compelling evidence emerges. It also demonstrates how advances in forensic genealogy can correct long-standing errors, albeit belatedly. The science capable of exonerating Tapp existed in the physical evidence from the start. It was the human system's investigative choices, prosecutorial decisions, and entrenched procedures that delayed justice. This is not merely an isolated miscarriage. It is a study in how vulnerable individuals can be coerced, how evidence can be mischaracterized, and how persistence by victims' families and advocates can force a reappraisal. Angie Dodge's life was taken. Christopher Tapp's life was interrupted by decades of wrongful punishment while the true killer lived nearby. Subscribe to Case Files TV, demand accountability, insist on science, and remember that evidence in a case file can free the innocent if the system is willing to look